Hey everybody, this is Ben from Pink Fohawk. We are an actual play podcast set in the Shadowrun universe, and you can actually listen to our first season. It's on this very YouTube channel. You can check it out. It's in a playlist, all 15 episodes of the first season, and we are actually coming out with season 2 very soon. But you don't care about any of that. You're not here for that. You're here for the second edition book club. So I got you. This episode's about our meeting, talking about the magic system, which is one of my favorite things about Shadowrun, actually. So it was very cool to talk to Tom and all the other second edition lovers that were in the book club. If you want to join the book club, check out the description below. There are instructions on how to join. Other than that, enjoy.
Aha!
Hello. Sorry, everybody.
All we had to do was say his name. He's waiting.
Beetlejuice.
Spin around and say Pink Fohawk 3 times in the bathroom. Cool. Hey, we got a full house today. This is pretty sweet. First of all, I want to thank some of the people that volunteered to move to the spectator role so that some new people could get a chance to talk into the to speak in the voice chat. It's pretty awesome for you guys. So you're the real heroes tonight. Cool. Yeah, I'll just get an intro going because I need these for the YouTube channel. Thank you everybody for joining up or for showing up tonight. We're doing the 4th meeting tonight, which is the magic section. We were all reading the entire magic chapter, which should be fun to talk about. And thank you, as usual, Tom, for giving us your time and showing up. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
And well, I don't believe that, but thank you for pretending.
Trust me, if I wasn't happy to be here, I wouldn't be here.
So say we all.
There we go.
So yeah, I guess I'll just open it up right away and see if anybody had any like high level thoughts to add to this before we start getting into sort of like going through it, chronologically. But did everyone able to read through the chapter at least?
Mm-hmm. I've read through it several times.
I've said this before. I'll say it again just to prepare everybody. One of the default answers will be Paul Hume was a practicing Hermetic mage, and his answer was that's how it worked.
That's pretty amazing.
Just so you know.
Well, thanks everybody. I think that wraps it up for tonight.
Good night.
That about covers it.
Yeah, so that magic is real, and this is really just a nonfiction book about how it works.
It's an owner's manual. That's all it is.
That's pretty amazing. I know, we were joking in the chat about how he's probably also like an MD. Like we're talking about like how the health system worked. It's like, well,
nope. He was a programmer, so he worked magic on 2 different planes.
And what is magic but just enabling dev mode on reality?
There you go.
There you go. I love how he is the contradiction to Shadowrun. He was both.
Mm-hmm.
He had to choose in Shadowrun, but not him.
Yep.
That's the thing. I think one of the things I think is fascinating about programming, it's kind of off topic, but is that it's the closest thing you get to magic in real life. You basically write words down and they make things happen. It's about the only place you can speak things into reality is software.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
I wanted to sort of like one of the things I thought that I've always thought about Shadowrun's magic system is how amazingly flexible it is, in the sense that like one of the things that I'm reading back through it, it's so at least the second edition rules are so both they give you enough structure to keep you from just breaking the game. They also are kind of like, okay, so you've got this spell and it does X amount of damage, and you say, okay, so what's it look like? And Shadowrun goes, I don't know, man. What you want it to look like? and you're like, well, maybe if it was like green and flashy, and maybe it did this, and Shadowrun's like,
okay,
that's what it looks like. That's pretty sick, dude.
It look like whatever you want it to look like, as long as what it looks like doesn't affect how it works.
Right.
And in the 90s, when I played this game the first time I played this game, I was like, it comes out of all these other games where magic was very prescribed, where magic was like, okay, so your spell does exactly this. There are exactly this many bolts of energy. It looks exactly like this. everything was very specific. And then you come to Shadowrun, and Shadowrun's like, I don't know, what do you want it to look like? It was such a weirdly freeing sort of approach to the concept.
Yeah, this chapter blew my mind in '92 when I first read it. I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's one of the, I mean, there's many things that set Shadowrun apart from other, tabletop games, and we've covered a lot of that. But I feel like Magic is, to me, the biggest because of how, like you said, it's flexible. It's almost like you can see the influences that D&D took for Magic with like the Vancian sort of like Tales of the Dying Earth, and there's a little bit of that here too. But like, I feel like Shadowrun really, I mean, the fact that Paul Hume just was one and this is how it worked, it says a lot, but it feels a lot like, yeah, magic is visceral. It's something that is connected with life force, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's metaphysical. And if you can, the fact that there's no range on most of the spells gives you so much flexibility too. There's not really much, there weren't really many rules to the magic in terms of each spell. It was just sort of more like, this is what it does. Have fun.
And also, if I may, what's cool as well is that when we're talking about, like, say, shamanic versus hermetic, it's never really said exactly what magic is, where it's from, how it works. It's like, it's all kind of left to our imagination. And I haven't read all the splat books, but I always felt like it was a bit nebulous. And since nobody really knows, like, do the hermetics really understand it? Do the shamans really understand it? It's like, who knows? It just works, right?
Yeah.
The answer is, it's pretty clearly neither. Because, like, one of the things, the only people who actually know what magic is in Shadowrun ain't gonna tell you. It just works. Todd Howard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in a way, that's kind of Vancian too, right? Like, we kind of like inherit this stuff we don't understand and just start to use it. But I always, if people are trying to get a feel for like how magic works in Shadowrun, I always turn them on to reading like the Ged books, like the Earthsea trilogy.
Yep.
Because to me, that feels much more along the lines of how magic works, because it's more like it takes something to do something, and it's connected to life. And the Hermetics, it's more about it's more about power, more about trying to understand it and weave it. Mm-hmm. And then, like the shamanic.
Again, remember, Paul was a Hermetic, so he was, part of the Golden Dawn. And
nice.
What was the phrase that pays? The will is the whole of the law.
Right.
If you can will it, you can do it. Can't like make that the entirety of a Magic game chapter, but
I mean,
did you?
Wolf tried to with. I was gonna say, Wolf tried to do that with Mage, and it didn't work so well.
It worked if you were one of the guys who wrote it.
Yeah, if you had the right group.
Yeah. Yep.
What was the reaction to Paul Hume and his Hermetic? Like, how did you guys react to that? Was it kind of like, tell us more about how this works? Or was it something that just he volunteered freely and then you guys just sort of took it?
He volunteered it, and there was kind of a, okay.
That's pretty amazing.
Okay.
This is why it's the best game ever. You had a Hermetic mage in your corner. What other tabletop game had that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it. Honestly, I liked reading into the Earth Dawn level of the magic stuff, which I then translated to my Hermetic nerd character by changing just enough that he didn't get all of it right, because he's a 6-year-old magician and obviously wouldn't know everything, but got just enough right that, well, if Harlequin was in the next booth over, would be very interested in their conversation.
That's true. The Earth Dawn connection with it as well is such a it's such a differentiator in terms of like other games where you have this sort of entire game as a backstory to another game. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously Warhammer has that sort of, I guess, but the fact that it fills in blanks but keeps a lot of things still nebulous, as Eddie was saying, like, it's like no one really knows where magic came from or how it started or or what is really happening. Like, and if a dragon knows, they haven't told us exactly. Right. And that's just so cool. It leaves so much to the imagination.
When Greg Gordon and Chris Kubasik and those guys were starting on Earth Dawn, that was one of the things was, well, Earth Dawn is about your world, that current world of Earth Dawn. Don't go into where it came from, how it got here. What were the cycles like before this? They don't know. Nobody knows. Just deal with what you've got now and how it works, and leave the rest of it alone. And they did.
And one of the intriguing things about how magic works in Shadowrun and Earth Dawn is the whole concept of how much astral space is a factor in how magic works.
Mm-hmm.
Everything sort of comes from the astral. Everything goes through the astral, and the fact that there's like that's not something I've seen in other games and other settings as much. Even to the point where I've tried a couple of times to sort of make Shadowrun work in other games. The magic rules are kind of the impediment because they're so tightly tied into just how the world works that you change that and you've changed the whole game. It's not even the same anymore.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, the physics of Shadowrun magic is based on the physics of astral space more than the physics of
right
the meat world. You know, so yeah, because you're really just channeling from there to here, and then there's some effect here because of what you're doing, but it's all coming from up there.
Those tiny details too about how like glass window you can't see through, and you can pass through hewn stone, but any natural barriers you can't. Anything formed by man you can pass through. It's just there's so many little things like that add boundaries to things without being so explicit. It's like those two words. It's like, okay, now like that, you just formed the boundaries of like basically what my astral reconnaissance is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I want to go in this building. I can't see through these glass windows, but they could, who knows what's over there. So my scouting can only get me so much. Yeah. You can go through the wall, but you don't know what's over there. It could be a spirit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
it
it's also
feels
borne out. Oh, sorry. Let me finish.
No, go ahead.
Is the object resistance table. The more something has been worked on by a name giver, the more metaphysically set it is, and the less magic is able to affect it.
There's very Earthsea feel right there.
Mm-hmm.
The name giver, how powerful names are, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, to tack on to what Noish was saying, like no other game. The fact that these different systems feel different than each other, and there's still a unified system there, and that you can debate all day on what edition took that too far to where it starts to feel like completely different games, or which edition evened that out too much, where it just felt like a reskin of each other. But I feel like second edition had that balance so perfectly set.
Yeah.
Where you're a mage, you feel like you're doing something different than the decker that feels like he's doing something different than the rigger who's doing something different than the street Sam. Yet you're all rolling skill versus a target number modified by gear,
Mm-hmm.
and scaling at every 2.
I was thinking about this earlier today about how like one of the things that's also kind of really, really neat about Magic is that in this game, everybody's choices are constricted by it. Everyone's. Even if you're a cyborg, the limit to how much cybernetics you have is limited by how magic works. How much stuff you can put in your body and how powerful you can be is the magic is affected by just everything is touched in every character you make in this game, as even if they don't have magic as their as their priority, the fact that they didn't choose magic actually informs how their character gets built and controls what choices they can make.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we had made the conscious decision that an up cycle was inherently a magical world. So, like you say, so much of it is based on, and I apologize, I have a cat climbing all over me at the moment. Difficult.
I feel like that's 90% of us.
To talk. Okay. I should be holding him, apparently. So it was inherently a magical world. Most people just didn't know it or realize it or understand it, which is why Earthdawn was so high magic, was because it was, a known high magic world, and it was well into the cycle, as opposed to Shadowrun, which was at the beginning of the cycle with some help in the early days to kind of net it out a little higher than it would have been naturally.
To use a metaphor, Shadowrun is at the beginning of the roller coaster when you're just starting to see up to that peak.
Yep.
Earthdawn is immediately after that peak and about to start heading down.
Yep. Yep. Correct.
And it also provides such good mechanical difference than other games, in the sense that you can balance a highly cybered character with someone else equally as badass, but they're like two ends of the spectrum, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like with Cyberpunk, you have a super cybered guy.
Yeah, but they were balanced and they were equally effective in their ways.
Right. In Cyberpunk, if you get super cybered, it's sort of like they tried to balance. I mean, I'm not a Cyberpunk player, and Bejeweled, I know you are. Maybe you could speak to this more, but I feel like they tried to balance that with like cyber psychosis to try to keep you from just going completely off the, scales. But at a certain point, it is kind of like the more cyber you have, the more badass more unstoppable you are, kind of. And in Shadowrun, it feels like, well, no, your willpower is going to suck. And so a mage can just, fucking zap you much easier than, you might be cybered and super fast, but if you don't kill that mage, he's going to wreck you.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like you have cyborg players who are like, yeah, well, I do actually need to put points in my mental attributes because otherwise I'm going to get flattened.
Right.
A single half-hearted mana bolt just deletes the Cyber Sam.
Just resets him.
Target number is 1 to take him out. Well, you don't really have to put a lot of effort in that.
Yep.
Yeah.
How many dice you rolling? That's how many successes you just got.
Congratulations.
And yeah, Eddie, you brought up a good point about, obviously another huge difference. And this is an interesting question too for you, Tom. Like Paul Hume, okay, so he was of the Hermetic persuasion, but so where did the shamanic, lore come from? And sort of, that's such a unique thing about this game too, in the sense that, like, you could look at D&D or other games. I'm always picking on D&D. I do love D&D, but I feel like other games like clerics and wizards don't feel that different. They do things a little differently, but Shadowrun, you feel completely different as a shaman than you do a wizard or a hermetic mage, And so was that something you guys came up with to sort of give an alternate way of working magic, or was that something Paul also had knowledge in?
Paul, he had enough knowledge to write about it. And he did a great job. If we were 30 years on, right, we probably should have gone to somebody who lived that life the way he lived the Hermetic, right? But a little bit of different day and time. But once we knew in the backstory that we were going to be leaning heavily on re-empowering indigenous populations, we knew we had to go there. Because it wouldn't make any sense that Daniel Howling Coyote or whoever, would be attending a Hermetic Lodge meeting somewhere in the Badlands. That didn't work. So we knew we had to do it, and we knew that it had to feel different. That the totems, for lack of a better term, are mini gods. And if Hermetic is will is the whole of the law, then shamanic is may I please. Right? The Hermetic mage uses the willpower to force things to happen. The shamanic mage asks nicely of the world.
Yeah, and that's in a sense like the difference between it's a very easy to understand philosophical divide between extracting materials from the world and giving and basically trying to do the least amount of damage, so to speak.
I remember also, sorry.
Somebody got stepped on there. Go ahead. Or not. Maybe it was Neko. Okay.
We're all afraid we're the ones who did the stepping, so we're all waiting for the other person to speak up.
All right. I was going to mention that one of the things, like the first edition, that I was like a Shadowrun fan, like way back when, but for whatever reason, I didn't think of playing the tabletop role-playing game until like very recently. In the first edition, I was one of those guys that asked in the forums, like, "Oh, what edition should I play?" And everybody kind of chimed in, and I eventually picked 5th for the sake of having the most opportunities to play, actually. And I remember reading through, and then when I got to the differences between Hermetic and Shaman, I remember being super disappointed that it was identical in 5th edition. And I was like, wow, this really sucks. I had been listening to an actual play podcast called The Hidden Grid, and they just literally like went into how different the two of them were. And then in 5th edition, it's like, yeah, it's basically the same. You have to pretend that they're different. And I was like, wow, this is awful. I just like, that's what gave me my first inkling of wanting to backtrack and play like a previous edition of Shadowrun for that fact alone.
We stripped all the flavor out, and also a half-trained alchemist can delete portions of the galaxy. So have fun.
There's no flavor, but close your eyes real tight and think of something delicious.
Something I noticed, this because I played 3rd edition more recently than 2nd edition until this renaissance we're engaging in right now. But one of the things I noticed rereading through the Magic chapter is that there are a lot of 3rd edition even started flattening some of the differences between Hermetics and shamans. Things like the difference between a shamanic adept and a hermetic adept is not just that you can only use spells or you can only use spells from your school or spells from your totem, but also the shamanic adept has the ability to astrally project, and the hermetic adept can summon or they can cast spells, but they cannot see into the astral, which I thought was fascinating because I had forgotten that was a thing. Because in 3rd edition, it's like, no, none of you all get astral perception, but none of you get projection. You're an adept, and that's that. Mm-hmm. So even as early as 3rd edition, some of these, shall we say, flavor bits or sort of things that distinguish the different magical styles was already starting to happen. So I thought that was really interesting because, like, the idea of a spellcasting adept in 2nd edition, you couldn't see astral space.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be able to see the spirits, which is also interesting because that means that a spellcasting adept would have a reason to create a spell that allowed them to see astral space. you could theoretically, based on the way the rules work, create a spell that gives you astral perception. It's something that a normal magician would be like, why would I do that? I can see it whenever I want.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Astral window spell.
Right.
And it's sort of like if you're thinking about, like you said, how magic and, or maybe it was Noish, right? Was that just Noish just talking? I think it was. But the fact that it's like how intertwined spellcasting and the astral is, it's sort of like you would think that that's how they kind of learn to use it, right? Is that they can see it happening, because that's the only place you can see a lot of the spells is in the astral as well. So it's just interesting that was, I don't know. That's just interesting to hear.
Well, and the
played
spellcasting adept was just basically taught, right? Do this, this, and this, and this will happen. Well, why? Just do it.
It's of astral.
Yeah.
Or they read a book, and the way anybody who reads a book is like, well, I understand this is what happens, even though I don't quite have access to that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
right.
I can understand academically that astral space is there, but I can't actually reach it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a reason to be a full magician.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
And it also makes the feel of an adept actually really interesting, because then I start thinking about, like, that changes what a spellcasting adept does. It also changes. We can talk about the conjuring adept too. They can talk to spirits, they can summon spirits, but they can't see them unless they manifest. What does that do to a person? How does that change how you interact with magic when you're like, I know they're there, I can sense them, but you can't ever see them?
Yeah, it fundamentally changes your relationship with magic within the world. Like Tom was saying, it's like you're kind of just trusting. It's kind of scarier. There's this whole other world you can't see, this veil you can't see past. You're basically like everybody else, except you can kind of will a few things to happen on your own.
You've got friends on the other side.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if Paul chose to do it that way because he perceived a hierarchy amongst those who performed magic in the real world, right? That there were some who could only do this, and there were some who could only do that. But real magicians, we could do everything.
Perhaps it was projection. Perhaps he was projecting. He felt himself as an adept.
Could
it was
be
an insecurity he baked into the system.
He was projecting all the way into the netherworlds.
In the chat, Eddie is asking, is the audio choking out sometimes for anyone else? I hear little tiny glitches, but generally everybody's coming through.
Everyone's working for me.
Yeah, I'm hearing everybody okay.
I can hear everyone.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it was, I joke about it with Paul saying this is how it worked, but that produced some, I wouldn't say arguments, but in-depth discussions over the ramifications of some of that. The if you can see it, you can affect it one was a big one for a long time, because I think some of us were a little scared of the implications of that.
Mm-hmm.
Age plus binoculars equals artillery barrage.
Yeah. Did
you pay essence for those binoculars?
If they're made of glass, I don't need to. Thank you. So it was just like, there was very often but what if we're missing something, right? There was always that fear that, once the game gets out to the however many thousands of playtesters, somebody's going to go, oh, you just do this and this and boom, like, oh crap, we didn't think about that.
Right.
That kind of thing.
You were saying it was tough to wrangle that information into a game. Like it was like he would sort of tell you this stuff, and then you guys would be like, okay, but we have to make this like a game.
This has to be a game. This has to be, yeah. And though I know Paul believed that if magic were really to return, the mages would dominate. We couldn't do that in a game. That wasn't we weren't doing Mage the Ascension. We had to find that balance. I think it all worked out. Drain was the real thing, that getting that in there as the, because we knew we didn't have a level based system. We didn't want to have spell slots.
Right.
It was a, you can cast until you can't anymore. And if you want to push it and burn yourself up, you can do that. But there's a price. Right? And that was the key, was there was always a price.
Right.
For stuff.
That's the coolest part. Like that's the way, that to me is, you're right. That right there is where you do trust the players. You're like, I'm going to give you this rope. Mm-hmm. Don't hang yourself with it. And that's really the rules.
But how would the essence mechanic reflect what's happening today? Right? Like, is it like Darth Vader losing the lower half of his body? No, because there was no cybernetics put in till later, right? Like, or there's no cybernetics now.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that wind up coming about, or how did that get explained?
Well, if I understand what you're asking, again, there was always a price, right? So, you want the Smart Link. Okay, there's a price. It's probably a manageable price because they're pretty popular. Nobody seems to be too concerned about it. And we knew that it was such a valuable thing in the game that even the most basic magicians might want to trade a point or so away to get some of those cybernetics.
Especially because Cyber Eyes that you paid for with Essence counted as natural vision for magic. Thermographic vision, grenades is scary.
Yeah, that was another one that we went back and forth a lot on about whether we would allow that. I seem to remember I was in the camp of no, if they're not yours, they're not yours. We're saying that non-natural stuff penalizes you. Why does it suddenly work? And the answer ultimately was because it's a game and we want to make sure that everybody gets to do cool stuff. That
mention min-maxers would just like get one cyber eye and they would close one eye and open the other whenever they wanted to do things, right? So.
I mean, you just turn on astral perception and you see everything in astral space and you can hit whatever you want. So even with cyber eyes.
Yeah, and you can see everything that's in the meat worlds too. I mean, it's
if I may, like I've always I think the concept of burned out mages are kind of cool, but it kind of goes back to when we talked about like the video games and people were like, well, we need for the players to be able to do everything, and so that's what it burned out. Yeah, but the whole concept to me is I always like how Shadowrun kind of penalized you from trying to be too hybrid. You had to really kind of like specialize, like, well, if I want to do magic well, I better not get too much cyber or none at all. And then the other way around, so I really like that price, because you had to dedicate yourself to be good at it. And I've never liked the concept of being too hybrid, because it reminds me of like my first D&D campaign where, like the min-maxer at the table with like a half elf, and he literally had all the advantages of a human and all the advantages of an elf pretty much. And I was just like, wow, this character is gross. Like, he grosses me out. It's like, why? You should have to pay a price. You should have to kind of pick a camp and go with it. I really hate min-maxing in that way. So I liked how Shadowrun was like, yeah, you can do it, but you're not going to be as good as this specialist over here,
Yeah, all the mages I ever built in second edition, I would only ever burn out 2 points of magic. 1 point of magic for some basic cyberware like Flare Comp and a Smart Link, and the other point to an ally spirit, because ally spirits are incredible. But I would never go for that third point, because at that point, you just shot yourself in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
With really long campaigns, though, is it? I forget if this is the thing in the second edition, but I know it was in fifth. It's like it's kind of like it doesn't matter how much you burn out because eventually you can just get it all back. And that bothered me as well, where I had like a house rule at my table. It's like, if you burn out, fine, but you'll never be as powerful as somebody who didn't, you know what I mean? And I always made sure there was a penalty for that, because I really hate the concept. It's like, well, I'm going to burn out early, but as the campaign goes on, I'll just buy all that stuff back and I'll just, you know, it won't matter. And since cyberware made it where it had that lock based on the essence, I was like, well, why should cyber people have a limit, and then magic you can just initiate forever and just become ultimately powerful? I'm like, no, there's got to be a price somewhere. You know, you either do it or you don't. But that was my own house rules, and I kind of like didn't like how powerful magic was in 5th, but I'm not sure exactly if that was possible in 2nd.
So it's technically possible, but due to the way initiation works, where the target number is twice the initiation grade, it's hilariously easy to initiate like the first 4 times.
Right.
But once you start getting up there, you start having to deal with target number 12, target number 14, and so on and so forth. So you would always run into that wall where it's probably best to focus on ally spirits, spell locks, and diversify your magic rather than go for pure big numbers.
We had a campaign in college where I had a friend who made a gator shaman who was a dwarf, and he did it. Dwarves get a higher willpower, and there was some benefit the gator shaman had, and we played that game for probably like 2 years. And arguably, the game master gave away way too much experience points. But I took over the game after the first game master was done with it, and I could not make anything challenging to that guy because he had initiated, he had spent so much experience on upgrades to his skills and upgrades to his magic and basically the only way you could limit him, because he had so many dice for literally everything, is basically be like, okay, so that doesn't work because I don't think it should. That's how you had to run that game. So if your campaign goes long enough in 2nd edition, you can very easily end up stacking enough dice that almost nothing is impossible for you. But it takes a while to get there.
Background count.
Yeah.
AGM 114 Hellfire missile.
Background count.
I mean, that's what you're doing. You're doing this thing as a game master where you're like, yeah, I think that orbital lasers are shooting at you now.
I mean, if an awaken has gotten to that point, that's when
I did that in a book. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that.
That is a good plan.
I was shooting at a dragon, but you know.
Right.
Yeah, it was, you know. Yeah, because I was looking it up because I didn't remember, but Gator Shaman get the +2 dice for combat and detection spells, which can be effective.
He was going after combat. I think he was going after combat. I don't remember exactly. I just remember being so annoyed by his character.
It does, you know.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Gator shamans are great because you get to negotiate with your player about how much they need to sleep.
All the different little personality quirks that it inspires is really cool too. Just with the mechanical changes that you get with each totem, it's such a cool concept. And you know, to my response to that character, Noish, is like, anyone that powerful starts to draw attention, and it starts to draw attention to your crew. You know, it's like you got you got Howling Coyote walking around. Like you're going to start getting, you know, high threat response. You're going to have all kinds of people just trying to take this guy down, or like try to take him in and use him in some way. It's almost like Shadowrunners are not meant to live that long, and if they do, like, they either get out, you'd think, to stay alive, or you'd have to retire them at some point.
That, or you're working for Dunkles on, because he's like, you know what, you are right there where I need someone of your level. So
you look like you could punch Horror Spawn in the face, and would you rather work for me or work for Lofweir?
Right, we're gonna go vault hopping with you. You're gonna go check out these cares.
Would you rather work for me, or I could eat you?
And it is actually It is actually a thing I'd be able to navigate now as a game master, but like as a 19-year-old kid, I was sort of like, I don't know how to stop this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a deadly game. It is kind of like, it's almost like kudos to that guy for making it that far with that guy.
No, he had polymers. He had a limousine, which he had the polymers installed on so that it would essentially turn invisible. He had dye coat put on that so that it would be impossible to penetrate. He had piled up so much stuff under the previous game master that I had not been there for some of the stuff he had done. So he'd flip something out. He'd lay out his character sheet and say, "No, I have this," and I'd be like, "Oh, I did not know that. I would have done this differently if I'd known you had
so
that."
You bring him out of his element, right? You do an underwater. You got to go to an underwater city. Guess what? You don't have. You don't have every toy on your character sheet. You have. What are you bringing with you? And there's no portable holes. There's no healing potions. You just need to, always just take the characters out of their element just a little bit.
You got your wits and your mitts.
I like that.
Or to take out their overpowered Monty Hall limousine. Bomb wired into the ignition. Like, by limousine.
Cars keep running into it because they don't
culture.
see it.
Just blow it up.
That's why rich people in Shadowrun have that remote start thing.
Yeah, it's called a henchman. Bob, go start the car. I'll be over here.
The other thing is that, and this is bringing us back onto the topic of magic, the other thing is that he had a lot of quickened spells. So he did things like he quickened bullet barrier to himself. Then was like, okay, so I have an automatic bullet barrier whenever I'm walking around every day. Which was, it was allowed, but it was also one of those things that it ended up being a challenge.
I mean, this spells can't be turned off, so you just
Astral
in the Astral. Like he is his own background count, and everything Astral around him is going to mess with him.
Well, no, you can mask it, but Fab would affect it. But anytime he needs to go somewhere, if there's an astral barrier, he's got to try and sync with the barrier, or he's got to try and bring down the barrier, which is going to bring attention.
Yes, he can't cross wards that way. Yeah,
exactly.
I didn't mean to turn this into a support group for like a GM problem, but
tell me he was an asshole. Someone tell me he was an asshole. That's all I need.
I have a player who took followers and picked 3 magicians as followers.
Yeah, the thing about quickened spells and why spell locks are objectively superior in every way is because quickened spells are always there, which means that they are always an astral presence, which means always grounded.
Which means you can ground spells through them. That's
a
another
bunch
thing.
of Lone Star mages summon a Force 8 spirit, and suddenly you got a fireball exploded out of your nostrils.
So that's something I think we should talk about here about the magic is the grounding of spells, because that went away in 3rd edition, and I don't know if it ever came back. But that was one of the biggest threats you could level against anybody who used magic in 2nd edition was like, what if someone grounds a spell through your weapon focus? What if someone grounds a spell through your power focus? Now all of the players were terrified that some rando was going to swing by in astral space and zap them.
As well they should have been.
Yeah.
Never returns in later editions because that would nerf magic, and they don't want to do that.
It's reminiscent of that scene in like Lord of the Rings with the Seeing Stone, where it's like there's potential for something to come through here, or to at least perceive through it, or something is a connection that you're not always going to be mindful of. That's just always there. It's so cool.
Because spell locks were actually a hard sell to players under 2nd edition, because you'd be like, oh, you can use a spell lock to turn on a spell and sustain it. And the player would be like, but what if a dragon came along and zapped me?
But that's,
you'd be like,
that's
how likely is that to happen?
That's Shadowrun in a nutshell, though. That's what I love about the rules. It's always like, here you go. Here's all this freedom, but here's the fucking pay. Here's the risk, and it's up to you to think whether it's worth it or not. It's so. I love that as a GM. You feel. I love that you guys felt that way as writers and creators of the game too. You're like, did we give them too much? Like, what's the thing we're missing here? Because I feel that way as a GM in every session. It's like, all I can do is just present challenges, and they have the tools to get through it.
Yeah, and as a player, it's really good as well, because once again, I like to play mages in Shadowrun 2nd Edition. I could have spell locks prepared, power foci, weapon foci, but also be smart about it and have to constantly wonder, is this the threat big enough that I just turn everything on and go full out? Or do I try to maintain security through obscurity and only pop into the Astral every once in a while to basically go up periscope?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What was the design thought around the spell lock? Because it's just so different from all of the other foci.
If I remember correctly, it just came out of conversations about, could you have spells that were persistent that you turned on and off? Right? Was there a way to cast a spell that kind of was hanging there waiting for you to turn it on and use, that had the power already in it? And we just came around to foci. And, well, what if you had a focus that you could lock a spell to, and it channeled the energy from astral space, and that's what ran it? But then here's the disadvantage. It's channeling energy from astral space. So it may not be the energy you want all the time that's coming from astral space. And
or from outside of astral space. And
if you leave it somewhere or give it to somebody else, they can track it back to you.
That was so cool.
Yeah,
reading that about, you can buy a spell lock from somebody, but like, who is that trusts you with this permanent tie to them, first of all? And there's so much, there's so much room for intrigue, and it's all just so uncertain. That's what's so cool about it.
How much of the stuff got cut and moved into, there was Grimoire, which came from first edition, right? So when you were originally developing in first edition, there was stuff that must have been cut that you delayed until Grimoire. But then in second edition, you would have rewritten some of the rules or reviewed some of the rules. And then knowing that some of the stuff is going to go into Awakenings. So how much did you cut? How did you just decide what goes where?
Awakenings was much later.
Awakenings was almost third edition era.
Yeah. So when I was doing second edition, it was
Grimoire 2.
But it was just a very conscious, what makes sense to be in the main rules based on how we saw people were using the first edition rules and the Grimoire first edition rules, right? Oh, there's stuff in here that just people are using all the damn time. All right, they should be in the main rules. And if I remember correctly, that was kind of the thinking there. I don't remember anything being specifically withheld after that process, but I could just easily be forgetting.
I'm gonna praise this edition again because God damn it, man. That thought though, that restraint, though that kind of like thinking of like, okay, what needs to be in the core and what can be left as extraneous or advanced rules to go into source books. Like second edition to me is the last rule book that did that. Where it's like, let's not fucking overwhelm them with a ton of shit that they're going to use maybe 5% of the time. Let's really stick to core rules, the core rule book, and I feel like second edition just nailed that. It's so well thought out in terms of like, what do they need to know to play the game? Not, play the game every single way, not know exactly how to be like, how to play, a super high level magician, not level, but, a prime Hermetic mage runner.
Prime
Like
runner.
they don't need to know that. They don't need to know that. They need to know how to like just play the game. And
Clever.
that's what and get really far with it too. You could get all the way up to, and then it leaves you reason to buy the source book at a certain point and go, well, okay, I want to initiate. How does that work? Or it's just
Another part of it
that
is
thought is so different now.
Another part of it is as I was going through this chapter, I was noticing the number of optional rules that no one ever uses that are actually in the core rule book. I'm thinking specifically about things like focus or fetish exclusive spells and exclusive spells, and the different ways in which adepts are created, of like the spell casting, the hermetic, the shamanic. They're all options. Like, I have never had a player take an exclusive spell, but it's right there. You can learn how to cast a spell that can only be cast if you're not using any other magic, and it's more powerful.
Healing is
seems
a
like-
great one to do that with. Everybody I know takes a healing as exclusive.
And it's right there. Like, basically, those are special rules. Those are flavor to the magic system that's in the core book that is very rarely picked up, but it's right there. If you want your mage to have all sorts of restrictions but get extra power out of it, stuff is there. It's
That's
just
the thing.
most players skip over that stuff because they're just like, well, I want to be able to cast a spell in all circumstances. You're like, okay, fine, but you can do this.
You can tell
even,
it's like
even in the core book there was.
They could almost rewrite that as like, instead of optional rule, it could just be called like a munchkin rule, because like all of those things were just there for munchkins, basically, like with the more metahuman variant and like allergies and that kind of shit. Like, it's like, you know, it's for those people that are like, how can I just like squeak out just a little more fucking power for this character if I take some specific downside? I can just eke out a little more performance out of this guy. And
Well,
all
it
those,
does add color. It does add color, right? Like,
yeah.
Absolutely.
I thought it was kind of cool how like, you know, with guns and stuff, like you could like you can specialize, but then you can't use all guns because you're like, well, I'm good at this type of gun, and then you can further go, well, I'm good at this very particular gun. And I thought it was cool that same philosophy moved over to Magic as well. So I didn't quite see it as min-maxy, although I really hate that type of stuff. I thought this as like, oh wow, I can like nerf myself a bit, but specialize here. And I was like, just like the you know, the Street Sand does, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very min-maxy, but it's also quite limited. I mean, go ahead.
Mr. Johnson mentioned in the chat, he's like, I've used fetish spells. And there is the option to use fetishes to make your spells more powerful, but you can actually learn the spell exclusively as a fetish spell, and you can't cast it without fetishes. And that gives you the bonuses that, you know, similar bonuses to the exclusive.
Right, but then you have to actually do fetish every time, and it makes your spell casting obvious.
It means you have to carry spell components with you all the time, which is actually, as a game master, that's a delightful restriction to me. I was like, oh, what? You fell in the river? Yeah, that stuff doesn't work anymore. Sorry.
question about adepts, because they're still in the magic section. Buying PowerPoints, they're like 20 karma for a PowerPoint. Isn't that a bit high? And how many people actually wind up buying PowerPoints versus initiating? So
in second edition, I want to just jump in here because I ran across this recently. In second edition, you can't buy PowerPoints. That's a third edition ad.
No, that's in the second. That's the main rule.
Only didn't see anywhere you could buy PowerPoints in Adepts.
Yeah, it's in the main rules. 20 karma, second edition.
Where?
Give me a page number because I need this.
I gotta go pull stuff up.
It's blowing my mind, dude.
Yeah, no, it's there. It's there.
I know it's in third edition explicitly, but I remember in second edition, the only way to get more PowerPoints was to initiate.
So I never had third edition until like I don't know, a little while ago. But and so, but I do remember it being in there. So I'll dig it up.
Like I'm 100% interested in that because I couldn't find it when I was looking at it. So.
Let's talk about physical adepts too.
Yeah.
Because I'm very interested to know where that came from. Like in terms of like, is that also something Paul Hume was he channeling magic through his body? Was he honed as
No, he liked Hong Kong action movies.
Bruce
Did you say
Lee.
he had a black belt? Did you say
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
also yeah. In martial arts?
Yep.
You
So
know what
was
I'm-
that
So
Sorry, go
what I'm
ahead.
so glad with physical adepts and so on is they didn't start going into the unbelievable minutia of this combat style versus that combat style. Like,
Right.
just keep it simple. Give me a roll. Don't. Well, I'm going to grapple them in the middle of the street, and this person's going to do Krav Maga. And it's just
And we have a giant table that says which is best against what, and
yeah,
Right.
rock, paper, scissors 4 times. Oh, you get revenge this one.
There's
Well,
only
but
so many
no, I
ways you
bet
can
my-
punch someone in the face.
I always
bet
joke with
on
my
this one.
player because he'll be like, I'm going to go up behind him and like judo chop him. And I'm always like, well, you're into Aikido, so you're going to need to do the skill web. And then he gets like pissed and I'm like, I'm just kidding. Just roll your dice, dude. It's fine. But yeah, it's just like, yeah, you're right. It's all just combat. It's really just flavor. And you're able to make it, it gives you that option. If you knew a lot about martial arts as a GM, you could have someone counter that martial arts style that they're using. And it's all flavor. It's not really,
yeah.
it's not some bogging you
And then
down mechanic.
And then you get into the arguments of no, you can't. Yes, you can. Well, that blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, no, stop.
Right.
Doesn't
Like
matter.
the sword fight in Princess Bride. This style good against this style.
Right.
Martial arts adepts are my second favorite characters to play because of a single combo: killing hands, penetrating strike, delay damage. Omae wa mo
And
Indeiru.
I had a player in college who decided to design his character after Billy the Kid, and his character was a physical adept who was just a gunslinger. It worked really, really well.
Yep, Doc
Yeah,
Holiday. Seen a dozen
Yeah.
Doc Holidays too.
I love like throwing weapon adept. I love that you can make these people just these insane specialists that use magic to push them over the edge.
My first throw adept was 4th edition. He could core a main battle tank with a ballpoint pen.
That's sweet.
Missile mastery. Welcome to Awakenings.
Yeah. And the whole give a troll a bow that is strength dependent. They will shoot an arrow through a tank.
Yeah.
Because their strength is 10, and that's no one with a strength lower than 10 is going to be able to pull this bow. This is going to be a projectile.
Yeah, when I talk about munchkins, that's my little brother had a bow troll that was an adept. That was more metahuman. He argued for the more metahuman rule. He argued for. He had an allergy. He had a silver allergy. He did all of it. So I'm a little bitter toward the optional rules, maybe. But you're right. They add a lot of flavor.
Ramrod in the chat is asking, I know this might be out of topic, but how was Magic's interaction with body index ruled out, as it feels weird that the physical adept acquired body counts toward it? It feels weird that you added a way for phys-ads to get more than 6 body index when they lose essence equal to body index, so having more than 6 is useless. I'm not sure I understand the question, but that may be me.
So, body index allowed you, I may be interpreting a little bit here. Body index allowed you to take a certain amount of essence and also a certain amount of body index and basically sort of double up your cybernetics because you were like, well, this is biological, so it gives me twice as much strength as what it would have. Oh, sort of basically you could get a body index and an essence drain and still have magic left with it.
I actually think in 2E, a magician lost essence for BioWare.
Yeah, they did. You didn't have the, you got a single cosmetic treatment, your immune system crashes of a 3E rules is written. But no GM would ever do that because it's stupid. Like, you get the silky skin treatment, you already start having immunodeficiencies. But the way it worked in second edition was that while there would be no essence loss for a mundane to get BioWare, because Awakened are much more tuned to their true pattern and rely on it to do their wizard stuff, they paid with both body index and essence. So you had to deal with the physical effects of too much BioWare, namely your body starts to collapse under its own weight, and the magic of your soul says, oh, wait a minute, that bit of meat wasn't there last week. I'm confused. What is...
Yeah, I don't know where I read this, and I want to say it was maybe it was in Grimoire, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I'm with the right crowd here that will let me know. I feel like I read somewhere that was like an interpretation of replacing like a lost limb, for instance, right? Is that if you replace it with a replacement limb, and I think what I read it could be BioWare or not, like biological or not. But basically, if you replace that limb, your body you could convince your body that it was whole again, like your aura, your essence. But the moment you got a benefit for having that limb, the moment it had some extra feature or extra usefulness to it, your body's no longer able to trick itself, and you lose that essence equivalent to what that limb was.
I think that's from Cyberpunk Red, because everyone screamed at Mike Pondsmith, despite the fact that literally in the Trauma Team chapter of 2020, it was cheaper and humanity-free to just hop on down to the body bank and have them slap some random dude's donated arm on.
Interesting. Maybe I did get that those wires crossed.
Shadowrun, the replacement cyber limb still costs essence, but it's dirt cheap compared to the, all the bells and whistles. You can add a blender to your fingertip. It slices, it dices, etc., etc. And clone limbs didn't cost essence.
Right.
In general,
they're just expensive
unless
as
you were
hell.
a mage, you didn't have to worry about, having donated limbs. And mages had to have clone limbs, but clone limbs didn't cost essence until 5th edition, which is just weird. Why 5th edition would do that?
Huh.
Ramrod just updated the chat with
that's
passage.
That's from Shadow Tech.
Okay.
If I don't remember, to be truthful, I think it was it might have been a preemptive effort to not have them go out of control. But I don't remember. I think there was a worry that BioWare would let the Adepts magicians just go nuts.
Yes, BioWare burnout adepts are cancer in 5th edition. No.
I also think interesting one of the things that I think is kind of fun about the magic system is also the adept has like the physical adept, which is always confusing to people because they'll be like, they won't, it oftentimes like using the word adept means physical adept, but there are magic adepts. Right. But you have the physical adept who can enhance their body. You have the summoning, you have the summoning ability to bring in spirits who are or essentially spiritual entities, and you have the ability to cast spells and use magic that way. So were there other types of magic that you guys had on the board that you were thinking about, or were those the three main magics that you had in mind?
I think that was the main ones we had in mind. There may have been some things that are lost to the mists of time at this point because they were discussed and put aside. But I know that we were acutely aware that we had a page limit. And that's why some things like, Paul immediately, we did the rule book and Paul immediately started working on the grimoire because we had things like meta magic and initiation and stuff that did not go into the main rule book because we knew it just would go on forever. And it would create a page imbalance in the book if the magic chapters were so much larger than everything else. Magic was already going to be bigger, but we were conscious of the fact that if it's 40 pages, yeah. So it ended
These
up.
are all about 40 pages.
Yeah,
honestly.
but that was conscious, right? We thought about that. That if any section was significantly larger than the other, it would feel like that's what it was about.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to be sure that we kept everything, and we did it by word count, not by page count, because we didn't know the page count until the wonderful artist team in the back actually started to lay it out. But we were cognizant of it. We knew that if magic was twice the size of combat or the Matrix, it would feel like that's what the game was really about. And these other two things were separate. Were secondary, not separate.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff got held back. Don't ask me what the process for that was. I do not remember. I think it was just with the magic stuff, it was pretty easy. We'd take these big chunks out, and we knew that they were going to go in the grimoire. But some of the other stuff, Paul started working on grimoire. I started working on Street Samurai. So we knew that there was stuff that immediately moved over to the new the supplements.
So why did spirits become one of those three? What about Shadowrun? What about your setting made spirits become such a significant part of how the magicians worked?
They were cool. I mean, but we knew that if again, the Hermetic tradition always had elementals, right? That was elemental spirits. That was part of it. There was quasi-religious connections to angels that were elemental driven and things like that. So we always kind of knew that was going to be there. We knew that we were going to have to do spirits having for shamans. And it felt right to do a different kind of spirit for the Hermetics.
Right.
A better one.
Makes
Depends
I feel
on the
like
game.
it is one of the things that makes a big difference between shamans and mages, because it's a philosophical difference, right?
Yes.
Like mages demand spirits come and serve them, and shamans are like, I know there's somebody around here who wants to help. And that corner of the cornerstone of the difference between those two philosophies, and I think that illustrates it really well.
And without coloring it good or bad, or that's what I also noticed immediately too, reading Shadowrun, was there was no the fact that there's not really alignment, and there's not like dark arts. I mean, obviously there's bug spirits, spoilers, but it's like, there's this evil magic, there's blood magic, there's things like that, but it's not really covered in the core rulebook. It's sort of like you could make a character that does that kind of. It's up to you. It's really just very clinical the way it studies. It's kind of how it talks about metahumans and whatever. It's this very clinical, high level approach, and breaking the spells into sections of utility more than anything else, which I love.
I was gonna say, if I were a Hermetic mage, like just from just world, like putting myself in the world, if I were a Hermetic mage and I were summoning elementals, I would have to tell myself that I was creating these things and that I wasn't enslaving them from another dimension. I would have to tell myself, as a magician, I'd be like, yeah, I am summoning an elemental, but that's something I'm forming from the mana. It's not actually something that I pulled from somewhere else. It's something I created and sculpted myself, and so it's not unethical.
I think there's a very good argument that that's how it works.
Yeah, and that it's not clear that that's actually not true. It's
not clear. But I think, again, if Hermetic mages are all about commanding nature, not commanding nature, but commanding reality, then yeah, you're taking raw astral energy, giving it a form, imbuing it with a mild intelligence, very mild. And yeah, you've made the thing. Now, where do nature spirits come from? Well, they come from, the collective unconscious, perhaps, or something that's manifesting it, and then you're asking nicely for its assistance.
That Hermetic mage who rolls up on the shaman and says, "You're actually creating this. It's not there before you call it. You actually made the spirit. You didn't call anything." Mm-hmm. And the shaman's like, "No, they're all around us. You're enslaving your friends."
Wouldn't this be like the data trial from? Wouldn't this be like the data trial from like Star Trek Next Generation? It's like, even if it is created, if it's sentient, then you've like created a life form, right? So it still deserves like your consideration.
I imagine like the
naturally occurring elementals, rather than full-on sapient beings, they're more like very, very smart expert systems, or basically they're the magical equivalent of semi-autonomous no-softs. They're really, really good at what they do, but no lateral thinking ability.
But what are humans then? Humans are biological machines that on a complex level, we just react to things.
Yeah, we specifically called out that that's what Watchers are, right? I mean, in the text it talks about, this is Watchers were a thing that a Hermetic university came up with.
Watchers are from Grimoire, though, not in the main rules. But yeah,
no, I understand. But I'm just talking about in terms of
the Grimoire,
the intent there, right? Some say, as it said, I'm literally looking at it. Some say it's just a bit of summoner's consciousness impressed into the fabric of astral space, and they are not very bright.
Hermetic mages are like, I'm actually summoning up Fire GPT, and it's just a large language spiritual substance.
I don't know. I think the Hermetic mage's conjuring feels very, you feel like you're walking just out of a description of John Dee.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Conjuring the angels and asking them to do your bidding.
Especially when you get into ally spirits in the Grimoire.
Yeah, especially ally spirits.
That's exactly what was going on there.
Yeah.
Oh, the fact that Hermetics use their willpower versus shamans using it does create that difference in how they perceive it too.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to will this thing to do what I want it to versus I know this thing's got its own shit going on a different plane. Like, come help me, please.
Though, having read the Earth Dawn sections on ally spirits, if I ever GM a second edition and one of my characters has an ally spirit, I will start subtly. It'll know things that it doesn't really want to let on, because sometimes ally spirits are just straight up dead people. Occasionally,
well, but an ally spirit is cut from you, right? Like you're designing the thing, so I don't subscribe to it being someone else, because you're investing all that karma, your spirit, your energy, your magic to creating a being. So I don't necessarily know if it would have someone else's personality.
Oh, one of us here.
It's like having a child, right? Like it's having a child. The child is part of you in the beginning, right? Like you basically. I mean, I'm not able to get pregnant, but for someone who's able to get pregnant, a child is part of them, and then the child becomes separate from them, at which point it starts being its own thing, and it grows into its own thing, and it grows into consciousness. And so an ally spirit, even though it starts as part of you, is not at the end of the day you.
Named. You give it a name.
Mm-hmm.
And a difference between the mana levels could explain the difference between the fluff. In the fourth world,
you do have to
netherworlds are closer, so you can just basically pop in and say, hey, you want to be my ally spirit? And they'll sign on. Whereas you've got to put in more effort in the sixth world because all the normal ally spirits are out of your reach, so you build one from scratch.
Yeah, we do keep it vague and say you have to assign it basically a home metaplane, so you can extrapolate that as you wish.
Like one of my mages is an elf who's a ally spirit, constantly critiques his Spirethiel, and occasionally makes commentary in a strange language that no one has ever heard before. That is literally just Frolic.
So I've got a question
more about yourself.
I've got a question about what I think was a great opportunity, but never seemed to kind of make it in, was like a techno shaman or an artificer. So someone that could use basically their magic to control electronic gadgets.
We specifically didn't want to do that in first and second edition. We wanted to keep we made a conscious choice to keep those things separate. They chose not to do that later on. That's perfectly fine. But we decided that we didn't want to have that crossover because that would everybody would do it and everybody would blend everything. And we wanted to keep it separate.
That's cool. I love that they're distinct. And I think that I love the fact, like in one of our sessions, we had the players had to go find like a material link of like a professional basketball player and put a curse on him, basically make him lose this game. And it was something that I was like, they'd have like an Astral referee to make sure that people aren't tampering with the game in the Astral, but it's not something you could record or not something you could capture on camera that's happening. And to me, I thought that was so cool. The fact that the other side is just completely clueless.
I thought you could capture that with a physical camera, right? Like if you used a film camera, then you could capture the astral, like you could see the picture, and then when you astrally perceive, you can actually perceive the astral of that event.
If the spell's visible.
Yeah,
right?
Could you not see the
camera? I think it was a thing in later editions where there's a special magic camera that that took astral pictures.
You're making me think about the difference between like film and digital recording. That's interesting. Now I'm thinking about that, and I would allow like somebody to pull out an old like magnetic, or not magnetic, but like a physical film, like where you're recording.
If you could figure out some way to make an organic film stock, maybe. But film stock celluloid, it's not organic. That shit's manufactured up to high heaven.
But even then, the spells are mostly invisible on the physical plane, right? Like if you're casting a spell, you're not seeing the mana bolt; you're seeing the result of it.
Why not?
I thought it mentioned in the book
mana bolts. Yeah, mana bolts specifically may not be. Yeah, but
I think it's only
mana bolts. You can see a guy point at someone and that person keels over.
Right.
If you can't astrally perceive, but if you took a picture of that with a physical camera, right, like a physical film camera, and then developed it, and then a mage perceives the picture astrally. The way that we played it in our group is you would actually see the astral signature.
That's very interesting.
That's very interesting to me because like I'm thinking about like how basically old timey film cameras are tracking light, and they're tracking certain things that I think magic might leave this is an interpretation thing, but I think that there's some really interesting implications in that.
Here's why I wouldn't allow it. I love how we're getting into this realm. Here's why I wouldn't allow it. there's something, and I'm actually going to quote the Tom Dowd.
Oh God, here we go.
When he was at RopeCon in 1996.
Oh Christ.
And he mentioned how Astral Security would use prisms. You could look at, use mirrors instead of security cameras. You've got these sort of optical, mirrors that can be wired through a building, and they can shift the prisms to see in different rooms. And he said it's a metaphysical thing. As long as the physical light that's hitting that object is also currently hitting the eye of the magician, you can hit him. You're tethered. To me,
Right.
you're separating it from the time that it was happening when you captured on a picture, and it's not the same light anymore. It's an image of that light at the time, but to me,
Right.
I don't think they would be able to see it.
We're not talking
I
about
think
small
that
targets.
logic
We're talking
actually.
about perceiving what happened. So, like, and the light argument actually is very interesting, because if it is the light that's going through, old style negatives actually capture,
Would capture
the
that
light.
light.
Yeah.
God damn it!
So
I was going to say, you just made
Oh,
my case point for me.
Screw you guys.
Thank you.
I feel myself asking the player, did you pay Essence for that film?
You have to
God damn
spend
it.
karma. You have to spend karma on the actual filming, or else it doesn't work.
I'm pretty sure that's how the magic cameras in later editions were made, which is why the special magic film plates cost so much to buy.
Mhm. Mhm.
The daguerreotypes will actually capture pictures of magic, whereas a digital photo would not.
Yeah, digital certainly would not, but you may be able to make some interesting arguments about, again, like
Very interesting.
you just mentioned daguerreotypes. Some of those early film stocks, maybe.
I mean, there are a couple of them. People argue, like, you'll look at some of these older pictures, and there'll be some sort of distortion in the picture, and they'll be like, "That's a spirit." You'll be like, "I don't know. That looks like
photography was a whole
yeah.
industry.
Yeah, what's for sure is that there's a Simpsons TV show about this. That is for sure.
Oh yeah.
Shadow Beat next time.
Going back and reviewing old film and pictures from like the westerns and stuff, that would be interesting.
Right. What was that? Tin type, right?
Like now I'm thinking about, like, how could this be written as a story? Like is there actually an old photo that meant nothing to someone in 1995 that now in 2050 you're like, oh, actually, this is a photograph of something that's incriminating because it manages to capture a spirit where a spirit shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
Dick Plottins.
Yeah.
Well, I think there was a historical process of using flowers to image on.
Ah.
I forget what it's called.
Mr. Johnson in the chat is saying eggs.
That's
Interesting. Interesting. Look at these. Look at these people. There's always something. Well, what is it like? It's almost like can't you capture images in like crystal? Isn't that something where, like, if you flash a powerful enough light, something can be imprinted? Either kind of like a photo camera, like if you have like where they have like huge bombs go off, you can see like basically a photograph of a shadow of a tree or whatever that was there imprinted on the ground or something. Maybe I heard that wrong, but I feel like maybe there's something there that an astral perceiving.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of ultraviolet and radiation burns are doing
Yeah,
that.
that's probably
But,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, maybe there's a way there. I could
very
see that.
interesting. You're an expert, Tom. You've managed to not paint yourself in a corner like I did. It's like you've done this for a while.
Years of
Another question.
dancing around on those bulletin boards.
Yeah.
Another
Hey, but what
question
if
I
you do actually?
had.
Well, maybe.
So I hate to change the topic a little bit, but what was the inspiration for the drain?
For what?
For the drain.
Oh, just that the more you did, the more tired you got. I mean, that again. Remember what I opened this with? Paul Hume said That's how it works. But it was, we didn't want to do spell slots, and we knew we had to do something that was limiting. Something that would not just allow you to throw 1 million spells a day. So we said, well, okay, so what if you just got tired from casting spells, especially the big ones? Okay. That sounds like a path.
Because I just think it works beautifully. Like, it really does make people nervous casting a big spell.
Yeah. Again, I mean, we've talked about it in prior sessions. We tried to spend a lot of time thinking about what's the risk reward for everything. Right? I got a big spell, I can nuke the place. Okay. But you might knock yourself over and be done. Is it worth it? Maybe. You decide. Or you could just roll badly and be done. You want to risk it?
So
I'm just imagining Paul agreeing, like, yeah, I mean, you do get tired. It's the only reason he conceded.
How aligned did you work with Steve Kenson at all?
Sure. Yeah.
How aligned were Paul and Steve on that's how it works?
It didn't overlap at the time that I was there. Because when Steve did his first thing for me, he was just doing adventures. It was later, and Paul was out of it at that point, that he started doing more source booky rules stuff. But yeah, Steve's first stuff, I forget which adventure it was. But he pitched it. He sent me a letter and pitched it, and I ended up calling him, and we worked on it, and he went and did it. That's how you did it back in the day. And he was wise enough not to include in his introductory letter 3 to 6 pages of why shit we had done sucked and he could do it better. You have no idea how many of those letters we would get. Like, really?
Seriously?
You think that's what's going to convince me? Oh yes, sir, you're right. We're complete idiots, and we need you to help save our 250,000 selling product line. You know.
So who was it? Was it Paul who came up with the spell categories? So like we have combat spells, detection spells, health spells. That was him?
Yep. And if I remember correctly, some of that came about because it carried over from the shamanic stuff where we knew we needed to have like domains kind of areas where one totem was better than others. And then that just kind of carried through because we knew we didn't want to have hermetic spells and shamanic spells as separate things. We just wanted to have spells. And then how you did it and how they came about was flavor, which meant we had categories for everything, which worked out fine. Because then you could do different foci and stuff for the different categories.
I remember how free I felt reading through it the first time too. Like because they're not restricted by level. You know, there's the fact that I can be a detective, a magic detective. I love the detective archetype, but there's a little magic in there. Yeah, and the fact that he can detect, you have access to all those spells from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you're a shaman, there might be some limitation on not limitation, but some perks or drawbacks to using certain spells from different categories. But it's like you're kind of got carte blanche to pick whatever you want from the get-go. Which is, to me, so cool. Like, it's not like... That's kind of a cool thing about D&D where you can look and go, oh man, when I get to be 5th level, I could get this spell if I wanted to. But I much rather have it the way that it is in Shadowrun, where it's just like, I want to do that now.
Mm-hmm. You can have the 5th level spell now, but it'll make you go to sleep after you cast it.
Right, or bleed out the nose if I cast any better.
Bleeding from every orifice, and a couple that were just created. But you can do it. Go for it, buddy.
Yeah, go ahead, cast fireball.
How come there wasn't some kind of overcasting? I guess there is the ability to learn at a force greater than your magic, but yeah, I guess that would be considered the overcasting.
Yep.
You can cast
That's
at a
the
force
orifice.
above your magic, but it makes drain physical. So rather than pass out, you explode.
You're a magical orificer.
You can also increase the area of effect of the spells.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the other things that's interesting also about the totems is that the totems are actually really flexible in the sense that if you abstract them just a little, they become more than just conventional totems, but you can the flexibility of being able to be like creating actual religions as totems.
Oh, sure.
And creating like the different paths as totems. Everything that you could consider to be sort of I'm struggling for words here, but like basically, you could become a Catholic shaman, and that just means that you're sort of using Catholic doctrine as your limitations and as the flavor of how you can use magic. You believe magic comes from God as opposed to magic comes from Fox.
And we very specifically decided not to go there and let players who wanted to wander in that direction knock themselves out.
I thought most of that was actually like the whole God thing. They talk about that actually in the grimoire.
Mm-hmm.
And how different religions and so on. So I thought they were primarily more hermetic than shaman, but I guess you could twist it to the shaman side.
It could go both ways, I think. Like from my perspective, it would seem like depending on what kind of magic you gravitated towards, you would do it differently. Like if you were a religious hermetic mage, like that's just how magic makes sense to you. You would be summoning angels instead of fire elementals, but it would work exactly the same. Whereas if you were a more intuitive religious magician, you would go that other route.
I'll concede that. That makes sense.
And it's flexible
like
enough too, where like you were saying about how you were saying how elementals can talk, basically, mage-splain to shamans on how magic works, and they're both right. They're like, you're creating it. You didn't summon this thing, and it's sort of like, okay, well that's how you see it, dude, but this is how I'm doing it. And it to me, I think it's like someone could be like, there's no God. You're basically getting a powerful totem on a different plane of existence, and it's like,
Shadowland BBS arguments between different schools of magicians got quite heated.
Right.
And
it carries
Chaos
over.
does it for free.
When you look into like Shadowrun Companion or whatever, and you see the different metahuman variants, and it's they kind of extrapolate from there that way too. Where it's like there's these mythical creatures that are really just trolls, elves, dwarves, same kind of shit, but it kind of gives legitimacy to these legends or these myths or these religions or whatever. There's so much flexibility.
Yeah, I've seen players, and this, like, in a certain sense, like if you want an alignment system, so to speak, from like a D&D perspective, the totems work really well for that, because you can actually have a player be not a magician, but follow a totem. You can be like, well, I know a lot about this totem, and I think that this totem is right about how to live your life. So I'm gonna follow Eagle, even though I don't have any magic that comes from Eagle. So you can kind of even build an alignment system out of the totems. The totems are really interesting to me because of their flexibility.
Shaman poser, cat poser.
Yeah.
You don't know cat. You can't even cast spells. How can cat have possibly spoken to you?
Right. I've got 9 lives just like cat. It's like, you're a poser, dude. You know, cat.
Yeah, I mean that I can totally see that, especially all sorts of mini cults rising up, right? I mean, may have just been, oh, I know that this is a thing, and I think I'm perceiving the world around me this way, so I'm going to follow this, all the way to I'm a really shitty shaman, but I can do stuff, and now I have followers.
Right.
Speaking of like posers, I thought it was hilarious that like posers is like part of the rule books and stuff. Like, where did that come up with? Like, like the orc and elf posers. Like, who thought of those? And I find that hilarious.
I don't remember. It came up as part of the world building, right? That there would be, well, I mean, I'm sure probably what it came more from is we were all very much aware of subcultures that had posers, right? Of real ones, the goth posers and stuff who
punk,
really, they liked they liked the costuming, and would show up and show up for things, but they didn't live the life.
The punk scene was a big one with posers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wizard
I'm
posers.
sure Paul knew some magic posers too.
Oh, I'm sure. That's why I was saying there may have been something with the magical hierarchy and some of the way he did, well, you're just a spellcasting adept. You're not a real magician.
How long did how elf posers are very heavily influenced by pop culture? So that one elf poser gang in Harlequin,
right?
They don't know anything about actual elf culture. They just stuck posters of Gil-galad and Fingolfin everywhere.
Yep.
And Aaron the Scribe encouraged them. So that fucker.
How long did
it
take to come up with like the magic tradition and rules? Because you talk about, you're all together collaborating. What's the timeline on that?
Oh, it was really short. Because up until Cyberpunk came out from our Talsorian, we were a straight Cyberpunk game. There was no magic. Mm-hmm. We were just a Cyberpunk game. And then Cyberpunk came out and we went, well, that was fun. We're going to be a year late to the party. There's no way. Until
did you guys know they were working on it?
I don't think so. I don't recall. I see. Well, we must have, because there must have been ads. There would have been ads leading up to that Gen Con where we saw it. But we didn't.
It just so happened that two separate projects were like sort of like working on it like simultaneously without you guys knowing. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, our working title was Technomancer. That's what we were called, and we were very early kind of pulling it all together. And Cyberpunk came out, and we literally said, "Well, that's it. We can't do the same thing and come to market a year later."
I mean, Pop cheated a bit by being friends with. I think was Walter John Williams who helped playtest and bounce ideas off of. And he's one of the OG Cyberpunk authors, so that probably had something with the ability to rush to market.
Well, you got to remember, everything that you see in Shadowrun, we came up with in no time at all, because we had to completely pivot. We were done, and Jordan Weissman, who was one of the owners of FASA, was in Japan with. They were installing one of their laser tag arena systems. And apparently had a dream about elves on Harleys and called up Bob Charette at 2 a.m.
The ancients.
And said, magic. That's how it's going to be different. Magic. And we all thought it was a really, really stupid idea. And then we sat around and talked about it and went, well, if we did it right, it would be unlike anything else. And then we just started slamming it out.
Whose idea was the magic cycle? Because Was that part of how it just works?
In part, we said, okay, so there's magic in the world. There's two ways to think of it. Either magic has always been there and only some people could do it, but now more can, or it suddenly comes back. And we thought it suddenly comes back was more interesting. It also meant we didn't have to rewrite history.
Right.
Because if magic was always there, then we needed to account for it throughout history. But if it suddenly came back, we didn't have to. We picked a point where it came back. So then we had to ask the question.
Paul knew it was already there.
Well, yeah. But on a big scale. So he said, okay, so if it suddenly comes back, why? Why now? Why does it come back? And Jordan's dad, Morton Weissman, ran a publishing company. And one of the books they published was about the Mayan calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Which talked about rising and falling worlds. And the long count and the great cycles. And it was a ding, there it is. And I forget who it was. Somebody sat down and did the math and said, okay, so if we say this is true, when does the next world start? And it worked out right.
2012, December 24th.
Yep. So he said, I think we ended up being wrong off by a year. Somebody after the fact went, no, actually it would be this. It's like, oh crap.
And it got integrated into the lore with Dunkelson saying, oh, the Mayans got it close enough for government work, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just, like,
So
oh,
were
we
you
made a mistake. No, we didn't make a mistake. We're just going to hang a hat on it and say, no, look, the guy who wrote that book was wrong.
You guys sitting around a table when you were doing this? Because I'm thinking about like how easy it would be to have these conversations at any time over technology from today. But like in the 90s, did you guys have to all like get into a conference room and hash it out? Were you on a conference line? How did you guys communicate this stuff?
There were a couple of different ways. Bob and I were local. We both lived on Long Island. And Paul was still living in Washington, D.C. So there were a lot of phone calls, but we a few times got together. Actually, I'm trying to remember. Maybe was Bob back? Bob may have been back in Virginia at that point. Yeah, so Bob and I knew each other when he lived on Long Island. Sorry, it's all coming back. Because we both worked at Fantasy Games Unlimited. I worked in the warehouse. And he was art director. And we would game together and do all that stuff. And then I think he moved back to Virginia. And I was still in New York, and Paul was in the DC area, and we would get together periodically down there to talk about stuff. But, we had the bulletin board systems and email, and we would talk over that. Paul worked for GE. Specifically, he worked adjacent to the Genie computer network. So we were able to use different channels on that. And would transfer files illicitly over GE's network when they weren't looking. Because back in the day, Genie would run at night on GE servers when they weren't using them.
Right.
And that's, I had a GE account, which I shouldn't have had, but I did. That we would use to transfer files around and do stuff like that during the day, not just through and it was, a little more reliable than going through Genie. Because you didn't have any file storage on Genie, you could just send some files around. But we had a little bit of file storage. But that's how we did it. There was a lot of phone calls.
How involved was Weissman throughout that process? Like, was he after his fever dream?
Yeah, he was reading everything and giving us feedback on tons of stuff, as was Sam Lewis and Dave Wiley. Sam was basically the head of operations and the main BattleTech guy, and Dave Wiley was marketing. And they all, as stuff came in, everybody read it and gave us feedback. I think they're credited in the credits. Let me look.
It's crazy thinking about how easy it is for us to just get on Discord today and have this conversation, and thinking about like in the early 90s, I realized I'm like, you couldn't have just gotten on Discord and hashed it out. You would have had to have gotten together at like a bar or something.
No, listservs, man. RN was. You guys were so active in Shadow RN, like it was crazy and surprising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
but there was so many ideas going around.
It was very clear to us that was the way to do it, right? There was CompuServe and Prodigy and and AOL and Genie and so many others. We didn't dig into Usenet that much because it was moderation was so difficult there. But like through the commercial forums, we had a lot more control when people would become assholes. So
Stop swapping with the big carp. Remember that?
Say that again.
Swapping with the big carp.
Oh yeah.
A bit of a tangent, but what was the deal with Nigel Finley? How did he become such a prominent? I guess he was a freelancer, as far as I know, right?
Oh yeah.
How did he become such a prominent developer for second edition?
Super fast. I'm not kidding. He would write fast and he would write good. You knew that if you got a manuscript from Nigel, you barely had to touch it. So he would get work. And he was always game. Hey Nigel, you want to write this big giant book? Okay. All right, man. Talk to you in 6 months.
Yeah, his bibliography is pretty impressive for the amount of time he worked. Yeah, for the amount of time that he actually had to work.
It's crazy. We always joke that there had to be multiples of him, because how else? I just couldn't. I couldn't write at that kind of a pace. I couldn't do it. And he had to write it nearly first, one draft.
Oh man.
Yeah.
If you ever want to feel incredibly unproductive, just take a look at his bibliography. It's
yeah.
Oh my God.
For different companies, for all kinds of different companies. Too.
At the same time.
Yeah. And we didn't know, right? So he'd be like doing stuff for us, like, oh man, he must be working night and day on our stuff. And then like 3 other things would come out from another company. Like, when the hell did he do that? Did the man not sleep?
Nigel Finley was actually the name of a ghostwriting company, and there were like 20 of them.
We wondered from time to time, but he knew the stuff. I mean, if somebody was writing for him, you wouldn't have been able to have the conversations with him about what he had done. Because there were, sometimes you get a manuscript and be like, oh man, this is so close, but Nigel, can you do this, 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 this? You'd be like, yep, I'll get you another copy in a week. Okay. God bless you, sir.
Crazy.
Yeah, I was just looking at the credits page, and it does say there is a note under playtester. Special thanks to the Genie Computer Network for their invaluable assistance, which they never knew about.
I think that's why Nigel died so young. God's like, you know what? I need some ghostwriting up here, so I'm just going to yank him out.
It was so tragic. So tragic,
and fast.
Such a huge loss. But yeah, he was such a nice guy. And no ego. He would just, and he loved doing it. And he loved
Did he ever play with you guys? Like,
no.
Play? No.
No, we rarely saw him. I think I met him maybe twice. Because he was always writing. I think we had a Shadowrun summit at one point, and we brought him and a couple other people in. just to kind of plan out stuff and talk through it, because we knew we were doing some big arcs to things. And we want to make sure everybody was on the same page. And I think that's when I met.
I was wondering, speaking of like Nigel's work and stuff, and that's where I was introduced to the Shadowrun slang. Like I remember reading Lone Wolf, and I was just like, "Wow, this slang is so crazy! It's like nothing like real world swearing, so you can get away with like saying some pretty crude things." But I was just like Drek and Frag, like where did this stuff come from?
Well, I mean, we made those words up, but the inspiration for it all was Clockwork Orange.
Oh right, the Droogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, go out with your drugs, have a real horror show night.
Exactly. That
Video that, mates. Video that.
Yep, that kind of talk was exactly what we wanted. And there were times, and I know especially with the novels, where we had to go in and pull it back, because then it would actually turn into Clockwork Orange, and you couldn't read the damn thing because you did not know what the hell they were talking about. So it had to be. We had to be very careful that the slang, especially the first few times, there was enough context in the book, in the novels, that you knew you could figure out what was being said. But yeah, there were a couple times where it was just like, nope, that's too much. I have no idea what this whole page says.
It's
I'm reading Dune.
Like trying to read the dialogue of the mutants in The Dark Knight
Yeah,
Strikes Back. They make no sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like with reading Clockwork Orange, the trick was that you got about 50 pages in and you understood it. Those first 50 pages were incomprehensible.
Yep.
Once you were 50 pages in, you could literally have the conversation with the character. You understood everything they were saying.
Yeah,
that's how like Dune was for me. When I read Dune, it was like 20 pages to finishing it, and I was like, oh, that's what that is, and that's what that is, and that's what this thing is.
Well, train spotting is a very well done version of that. If you ever read it, it's like very very Scottish patois, but you figure it you start figuring out what they're saying like as the further in you go, because there's a lot of like transliteration of the way they pronounce the words. So like it's in their accent almost. It's like written in their accent.
And it's funny you're saying.
I haven't read it.
I just realized when I probably met Nigel was at Gen Con in 1991. Because there is a note in Shadow Tech from Carl Wu who says, in a special don't shoot to the members of the illustrious Gen Con 91 breakfast/dinner club, next time it's someone else's turn. Because I'm sure what that was he was there, Nigel was there, other people there, and we were bouncing ideas around. And Carl had ambitious ideas. So he would tend to get pounced on. Like, you're insane, dude. You can't do that. But it took a long time to get Shadow Tech into shape because of that. And again, Carl was another one. He was a scientist. So it became difficult to do but this is how it works. Okay, dude, I get that's how it works. But game balance, let's talk about that.
Oh, he was the one who wrote GURPS Illuminati. That's what I remember him from.
Could be.
Yeah, Nigel Finley wrote GURPS Illuminati. I think
he wrote everything.
He did some stuff for TSR too. I don't remember what that was.
He did everything.
Yeah.
I loved all the Van Richten stuff. It was so thick.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What about other writers that were similar? Because you'd mentioned once that Nick Smith was the warehouse manager, right?
At Fantasy Games Unlimited, yes.
Yes. And what about other authors that you worked with?
A lot of them
bring.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I was going to ask if any of them brought like new elements to Shadowrun that you guys hadn't.
Yeah, everybody brought something. We tended to try and give them as much freedom as we could, right? So they would get guidelines. But most of the big stuff would, we would reserve. But I mean, everything you know about as technology was Nigel, right? I mean,
Yeah, you're so good at that.
yeah, we talked about the big strokes, but he's the one who went in and wrote the hardcore nasty.
Yeah, because I remember one of the early first edition adventures just has vague references to, oh, they call themselves the Aztec gods, but are they really?
Right, exactly.
It was Findley's as long source because no, it's the horrors, it's Virgian pals.
Yep. Without saying that, but yes. Yep, that's exactly what that was. But a lot of the guys who wrote those kinds of source books, we just let them run. For good or bad. Sometimes some stuff got through that probably shouldn't have, but it's okay. Carl Sargent writing all the UK stuff and Jim Long writing the Seattle source book, he defined a whole bunch of stuff for Shadowrun because he put it down there, and that became the reference.
Like how canonically Red Lobster survived in the Sixth World.
Damn straight.
Because nothing can kill those cheesy biscuits.
It thrived. It's because of all those lobster totem. The lobster totem smiled upon that franchise.
He said it right. It's the cheesy biscuits. They just rode through on everything else. But that's very true. Is that a lot of the authors would define a lot of stuff, and that became canon. Especially again that early stuff because Jim was working on the Seattle source book. While we were still writing the damn rules, because we knew it had to come out. Right. That was something we noticed, and all the props to Mike Pondsmith and Ortel Sorian and Cyberpunk. They were financially unable to support the line that first year. So
the last year, as the missing Chromebook 5, Firestorm Aftershock, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm more talking about 1988 to 89. Because we assumed that Ortel Sorian was going to be able to produce all their supplements on the schedule that they indicated. And that's what would kill us, is that we would be, not that we would be fighting against the base game a year later, but we would be fighting against the base game plus 4 or 5 supplements. So we knew that when we came out of the gate, we needed to come out with not just the rules, but with supplements. And that meant they had to be ready, in advance.
Had to be edited, they had to be printed, they had to be typeset.
Yep.
All that
They had to be created at the same time.
Yep. So people were working on stuff. That's why I said I rolled straight from working on the core first edition rules into Street Samurai and just slammed that out. And the admittedly goofy layout and all that came from the fact that it needed to come out fast. So we created a very art heavy, white space heavy layout, so there would be less text that needed to get created. And a lot
of all the shadow talk.
Yeah, but that was, you could write that fast.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So filling in a lot of that space with shadow talk became, because I could just sit there and go, blah, 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 blah. These guys are talking to each other and they're saying dumb things, and this is this and this, and okay, this is, here, we'll say something mysterious here. I don't know if we'll ever come back to that, but there it is.
Did you write most of the shadow talk yourself? Because that was friggin' funny, man.
Yeah, in Street Sam, yeah.
Oh my god, the number of lulls that came out of that was brilliant.
Oh, the Seattle source book is so good. The original.
It's interesting too now, like hearing that you guys were developing the game in a similar format to like what's happening in the Shadow Talk. It feels like that type of dialogue would have been natural to you anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were all very active on the various BBSs before using it as customer service for Shadowrun. And I'm sorry, I said Jim Long. I said Jim Long on Seattle, but it was Boy Peterson.
I love that you guys hijacked the G&E. I love you guys you were deckers basically.
Yep.
Freeloading.
As you can see, a tech savvy.
Right.
Yep.
And I think that's what's so interesting to me. I love those early source books of Shadowrun because, now talking through sort of the timeline and the context and the insane short amount of time you guys had to crank this shit out. What's crazy is that, the result is they all feel very unique and different. There's not like a standard structure set yet. Seattle source book, I mean, nothing looks like that. It looks like a real fucking guidebook, because you guys hadn't built like what are you going to do for a supplement? And he just kind of went with it. And then, your Shadow Talk and your Shadow Beat and your Street Sam catalog, they all felt so like, I still feel like I got to fucking own them all. Like, I'm just like, it's not just like, I want to know more about Magic, so I'll buy this. It's almost just like, what am I missing out on? Because the art, the style, the voice of it, they're all so distinct. And I think that's just such a cool end result of like you guys rushing it all at once, basically.
Sort of meta, like in a sense, like the world building that came out of that, because like all of those felt like a different publication from different publishers, because their voices were like, this is a tour guide of Seattle, this is a catalog of guns, and they all had such a distinctive in-world voice that, like, there's a certain kind of world building that came out of them feeling like they were different publications from different companies in the world.
Yeah, it was cleverly done. And with the Shadow Talk, like we said, like the unreliable narrator, where you can't, it's so well done, where you might be contradicting, who knows? I mean, it turns out you guys are writing at the same time. You might be contradicting something someone else is writing. And so you build that in. Like
the snippet in Shadow Tech that says that monoclonal antibodies don't work on viruses.
Means nothing to me. You just said words.
I missed that one.
The immunization treatment works by introducing hybridomas permanently into your system so that you've got a constant monoclonal antibody treatment. And the full spectrum immunization just means you've got a bunch of those running around your bloodstream killing most common pathogens.
Wow.
Monoclonal antibodies are great for the treatment of many viral diseases, most recently of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. But it was 1989. Who knew?
Yeah, you're listening to some guy called Chum Station. Yeah. And I can't remember. I think it's either, is it Neo-Anarchists Guide to Real Life, or I'm not sure which one it was, but it talks about like the Gaiosphere. And it talks about like the suborbital flights, and basically they discuss what would happen if a mage were to break the manosphere bubble. And it's all the Shadow Talk of them being like, I know a guy and he went insane, or I know someone and nothing happens, but and then someone else like, well, did he cast anything, or did he try to perceive astrally? It's like, well, no. And there's just all this mystery to it. Yeah. That I love.
It's all like, how do you know that any of the people talking here are actually coming from a legitimate place, and just as opposed to just making shit up?
Right.
I saw
like that guy posting doesn't actually have any magical skill. He just thought it would make sense, and so he was doing it for the clout.
And they're all data dumps. That's the brilliant thing too. At a certain point, it's all just put onto Shadowlands, and it's these sources they find, and then they kind of extrapolate and they're all conspiracy theorists, basically.
Yes. Commenting
on all of it.
Who named the magic energy mana?
I don't recall, but I'm sure it was Paul. Mana may have been...
Not from the Bible.
Hang on a second. Hang on. I don't have my old copy, but back in the day,
I remember Riffs was using the mana, because they talk about mana lines, which wrap around Earth and so on.
It was fairly common. I'm looking to see. I pulled out my Steve Jackson Games version of Authentic Thaumaturgy, which was the booklet written by Isaac Bonewitz about how magic was supposed to work in reality. And this was a how to make real magic work for games. And I was just looking to see if he used
What's the name of the book?
Authentic Thaumaturgy.
That's awesome.
Was there, wait, was there an index? Am I wasting my time when I could have just looked in the index? Yep, Mana.
Indexes back in those days were unreliable.
I have done that.
Yep. So Mana was the magical, psychic, spiritual energy. So that's. But again, I don't think he was the first. But I'm sure. I mean, that was when it was prevalent. I'm trying to see when he wrote his original version, because I had this like cheap blue paper cover version of it before Steve Jackson did it. 78, did you say?
1978 was when it was first published, and then it was republished in 1998, and then 2005.
Yep.
According to Wikipedia, I see the 1978 there.
Yep, and that's I have the I think what I'm looking at is the Steve Jackson 1998 version. But there was a like I said, it probably was printed at the equivalent of a Kinko's or whatever the hell, and hand bound and stapled, and I have no idea where that is anymore. But
says he was the only person to earn a degree in magic from the University of California.
Yep. I believe he earned it. They went, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing? Maybe this is not the smartest thing we've ever done. But yeah.
I have a question about the insect totems, and I know that goes back to first edition where player characters weren't allowed to use them.
Yep.
And obviously you guys were building toward that reveal with Bug City, or was that something that was that something you guys just came up narratively as like, it'd be cool to have these like kind of alien, kind of Lovecraftian idea of magic, or was that something that Paul believed in?
No. When we were talking about shamans, we were talking about totems, and we were thinking about all sorts of creatures and stuff like that. We got into what about this, and what about could you have a cockroach totem? And we were kind of joking. But what if all the insect totems were nasty? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it kind of spun from there, because we knew we needed to have not necessarily the bad guys, but we needed to have something that you went, oh, that's just wrong. Kill it.
Insect spirits, they're just giant magic bugs. Is that wasp that stung you evil?
They're not evil. They're just misunderstood.
Yeah,
I think it's such a brilliant.
Had a GM in one of my Shadowrun games argue that mantis spirits were unironic good guys.
Wouldn't say they were good guys.
They still eat people, but they prefer the taste of other bug spirits, so we point them at nests.
Yep. They were certainly...
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
It's my chummer.
So, I guess
the enemy of my enemy is my chummer.
Yeah.
Sort of on
the enemy of my enemy is my enemy's enemy.
Sort of on the topic. How did the novels work back then? Like, it seems like a lot of companies had lots of novels, and there seemed to be people who were, like, I guess Michael Stackpole, who almost specialized in writing RPG novels. Uh-huh. Were they driving people to the game, or was it just for people who already played the game?
Yeah, it was the hope was that they were driving people to the game. I'm not sure exactly how successful that was, but the sales were always good. Obviously TSR kind of kicked it off with their novels, but FASA was doing the BattleTech novels very successfully. And we followed their model, which was to use the novels as the driver of the fiction. Right? So that if you wanted to see world stories would happen in the novels with some flip back over to the game products like Bug City and Burning Bright, or I should say Burning Bright and Bug City. So there, we tended to have novel writers writing the novels, but obviously a lot of the game writers wanted to write novels too. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And again, how many of those did Nigel write? And of the game supplements, crazy bastard. But people wanted to take the shot at it, But Stackpole, as an example, he was primarily writing BattleTech stuff at that time. He wrote a couple of short stories for Shadowrun, but he never did any novels. I don't think he ever did. Certainly not early on.
No, he did one.
Okay.
Yeah, he did one. And then right after he did it, he became the line developer for BattleTech.
Stackpole?
Yep. I thought he was the line developer for BattleTech.
I don't think so.
Or Mech Warrior or whatever.
I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
I know he wrote a trilogy for Dark Conspiracy for GDW at some point in there at the same time.
Yeah, because Sam Lewis was the line developer for BattleTech for as long as there was FASA, basically. So maybe after it moved companies, I'm not sure. But that was after me.
Looking at his Wikipedia page and it's not helping. He's written a lot of stuff. It's not clear.
Yeah, but Mike, it was the stuff he wrote was fun, but it had a very pulpy feel to it. I mean, his Raven short stories was basically Doc Savage, unabashedly, which was fine, but it really didn't. It was nice side material, but it really didn't match the feel that for the rest of the stuff that we were doing. But he was busy with BattleTech, so that fight never happened.
I don't know about anybody else. I've pretty much covered the stuff I wanted to talk about. I mean, I know that it's just it's hard to describe. I think we've done a pretty good job trying, but like it is such a. It all goes back to that dream that Jordan had. It's like it is what sets it apart from.
Yep.
From Cyberpunk, and it's set it apart from every other game. It's crazy.
The only note I have is that I really love that totem graphic going at the beginning of the chapter where the totems are being described. There's that graphic that goes down the center of the page. I feel like that really sets the mood for what a totem feels like. And that's the only note I have that we haven't talked about. So
the art itself, all of that stuff, like. When you look at like that wizard with the binoculars and he's waving his hand over his head, it really does show you like it's like it hammers home like this has never been done before. You know what I mean? Like this like he's using modern technology. This guy's obviously someone from either today or the future, and he's casting magic. I don't know. It's just
clearly a lunatic too. Look at the way he's waving his hands.
Dude. Yeah, he's bad news.
Yep.
Someone was like, don't geek that guy.
Hire that guy.
But that's directly, I mean, Jeff Laubenstein did that. And that was from reading the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you can look through binoculars and cast magic? I got this.
There's also the chapter that like on 152 that Tim Bradstreet picture of that street shaman with the cigarette painting the magic circle on the ground.
Yep.
I fucking feel that.
Yeah, that's my favorite drawing in the whole book, and it's with the detection spells and the fact that there's astral signatures, and there's so much promise for this like noir story, but told through magic. Yeah, it's so good.
Anyway, it's about 10:30 where I am, and I'm starting to crash. Thank you for your time, Mr. Dowd, and I've really enjoyed this.
Feel it.
Y'all have a good night.
Let's wrap it. I feel like
Okay.
I feel like we could read the Matrix chapter for next time, since they're, as Tom said, it was thought of. This is deliberate. It's the same link as Magic. I'm really excited for the Matrix one, and I know. Yeah, I'm sure you're not, but I'm really excited to like. Well, I'm just to give my personal anecdote. Like I haven't yet really run Matrix in terms of like my player characters. Never really had player characters that play deckers, and I've been mulling it over and thinking about using VR 2.0 or whatever. And at a certain point, I really sat down. I was like, I'm gonna start reading the core rules again, and it's like it's not that bad. I mean, there's definitely going to need to be some stuff where I need to streamline it, and we can talk about that next time. But it's pretty succinct. It's pretty. The thing that slows down is it's a dungeon crawl.
Yeah,
it becomes a little mini dungeon crawl.
I just knocked a whole bunch of stuff off my desk, which is why I sounded distant from the microphone because I'm on the floor. But yeah, if you can figure out how not to do this dungeon crawl, it works just fine.
Right. So we'll be asking you all about that.
Maybe we can figure it out.
I'm so
we'll
excited.
solve the Matrix next time.
We will.
And then we'll publish something like the Ultimate Edition.
Hollow
Matrix
Streets. Tom Dowd Streets.
I'm
You can actually sell it on Drive-Thru RPG now.
Yeah.
I thought about our conversation, Tom, when I saw that. I was like, dude, the time is now.
Yep.
I mean, you're not
I'm
busy.
not quite sure that Catalyst would appreciate second edition compatible products, but who knows?
According to the
they
Hollow
claim-
Street document, they claim, yeah.
Jason Hurd said any edition, any materials, they don't care. They're making 25%.
Yeah, in that art, you talk about that interview he had with, there's some YouTube video. Yeah, he was like very adamant about like Shadowrun is Shadowrun, and your Shadowrun is just as valid as someone else's, and we want to support all of it equally.
Maybe we will make them regret that.
So I hear that if you try to revise the core book, they won't.
Sure.
Or you try to write another core book of your own, they won't let you do it.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. But a system, I guess that is rewriting the core. Well, that's one of the lines.
VR3 isn't, or
It's
2.5.
optional rules.
Yeah.
It's VR 3.0.
Alternative rules. We'll just stick it in the back of an adventure.
Yeah.
I love how you think. That's awesome.
All of us right here, we'll solve it. We'll close the book on that, and we will have fixed the Matrix.
There you go.
It's Gold Angel, and it's just Silver Angel, reworded
right.
a little bit differently. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for showing up and talking through this, and thank you again, as always, Tom. It's fucking awesome to talk
You
this
betcha.
stuff through with you.
All right. We'll see you next
It's
time.
been great.
All right. See you guys in like a month.
All right. Good night.
Later.
Later.
There you go. That concludes the second edition book club magic section. Next time we'll be covering the Matrix section, which I'm super fucking stoked about. Be sure to check that out. As of this recording, our next live meeting is on Wednesday, May 17th. So if you want to join, check out the description below. You can join the book club and you can be there and talk live with all of us. We'd love to see you there. Thanks for watching. And hey, remember that podcast I talked about? We actually also were nominated for an ENnie in 2022, and we won the Audioverse Awards from 2022. So I'm just saying it's actually pretty good. You can take my word for it, but let's the ENnies saying that, man. I'm not even fucking saying it. The ENnies are saying that, and also the Audioverse Awards. So you should check that out. Thanks again for watching this, and hopefully we'll see you around.